Last Tuesday, I got a call from my grandmother's bank. The fraud department. Thompson, we need to speak with you urgently about your grandmother's accounts. In the past 6 months, she's wired $340,000 to various accounts overseas, and this morning she came in trying to withdraw her last $50,000 in cash. When we questioned her, she said it was to bail out her granddaughter Charlotte, that's you, who's been arrested in Mexico. I said, I'm not in Mexico. I'm not in jail. I'm standing in my office in Denver. The manager said, we know. We think your grandmother has been the victim of an elaborate phone scam, and based on the amount she's sent, this has been going on for a very long time. I'm Charlotte. I'm 30 years old, and I just discovered that scammers have been calling my 78-year-old grandmother almost daily for 6 months, pretending to be me, my lawyer, police officers, and judges, convincing her that I'm in desperate legal trouble and manipulating her into sending her entire life savings to save me. I'm sitting in my grandmother's living room right now at midnight, surrounded by 6 months of bank statements, Western Union receipts, prepaid debit cards, and a notebook where my grandmother has been documenting every phone call, every demand, every threat these criminals have made. The scope of this scam is so massive, so psychologically manipulative, and so devastating that I'm still trying to process how this happened to my brilliant, careful, loving grandmother without anyone, including me, noticing until almost everything was gone. Hey everyone, it's Charlotte. I need to tell this entire story because phone scams targeting elderly people have become an epidemic. And what happened to my grandmother is happening to thousands of seniors every single day. These aren't just simple scams where someone calls once asking for money. These are sophisticated, long-term operations that use psychological manipulation, fear tactics, and isolation techniques to drain elderly victims of everything they have. And the people running these operations are very, very good at what they do. Let me start from the very beginning, because the day this started, my grandmother received a phone call that would change her life and mine. My name is Charlotte Thompson. I'm 30 years old, and I'm extremely close with my grandmother, Margaret Thompson, who's 78 years old. My grandmother is sharp, educated, she was a school teacher for 40 years, and has always been financially savvy. She lives independently in a small house she's owned for 35 years. She drives, she volunteers at her church, and she's always been the person in our family who everyone goes to for advice. My grandfather passed away 10 years ago, leaving my grandmother as a widow. He'd been a civil engineer, and together they'd saved carefully throughout their lives. When he died, he left my grandmother with their paid-off house, about $380,000 in savings and investments, and a modest pension. She's been living comfortably on her pension and Social Security, leaving her savings untouched for emergencies or to eventually pass on to her children and grandchildren. I'm my grandmother's oldest grandchild. I live about 2 hours away and visit her at least twice a month. We also talk on the phone every Sunday evening. It's our tradition. We're very close. She helped raise me when my parents were going through a difficult divorce, and she's always been one of the most important people in my life. I have a younger brother, 2 cousins, and my grandmother has 3 children, my mother, my uncle, and my aunt. We're a close family, and Grandma sees or talks to at least one family member every few days, or at least that's what I thought. About 6 months ago, everything changed. But I didn't know it at the time. It was a regular Wednesday morning, October 18th, according to my grandmother's notebook. Grandma was at home making breakfast when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number. She answered, I need your help. I'm in so much trouble. My grandmother's first instinct was concern. She said, Charlotte, what's wrong? Where are you? The voice said, I'm in Mexico, Grandma. I came down here for a friend's wedding, and I got in an accident. Someone was hurt. The police arrested me. Grandma, I'm in jail. I'm so scared. The voice was young and female, and in her panic and concern, my grandmother believed it was me. The crying and fear made it hard to distinguish the voice clearly. And why would she doubt it? Why would someone pretend to be her granddaughter? Grandma said, Oh my God, Charlotte, are you okay? Are you hurt? The voice said, I'm okay, but Grandma, I need help. I need to post bail or I'm going to be stuck here. The bail is $8,000. Can you help me? Please, Grandma. I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. My grandmother's protective instincts immediately kicked in. She said, Of course I'll help you. What do I need to do? The voice said, Thank you, Grandma. Thank you so much. Someone's going to call you. It's my lawyer. He'll tell you how to send the money. But Grandma, Please don't tell Mom or anyone else. I'm so embarrassed about this. I don't want everyone to know I got arrested. Can you please just keep this between us? That request, to keep it secret, should have been a red flag, but it's actually a key part of the scam. They isolate the victim by making them feel like they need to keep the situation confidential. My grandmother agreed. She said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I won't tell anyone. We'll get you out of there." The call ended, and within 5 minutes, my grandmother's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a different number, and a man's voice said, "Hello, Mrs. Ma'am Thompson? This is attorney James Martinez. I'm representing your granddaughter, Charlotte, in Mexico. She's asked me to contact you about posting her bail." The man sounded professional, calm, and authoritative. He spoke with a slight accent that could have been authentic or could have been manufactured. He explained the situation in detail. Charlotte had been in a car accident, someone was injured, Mexican law required bail to be posted before she could be released, and time was of the essence. He said, "Mrs. Thompson, I know this is a lot to take in, but your granddaughter is in a very difficult situation. The Mexican legal system is different from the U.S. system. If we don't post bail within 24 hours, Charlotte could be transferred to a federal facility and it becomes much more complicated and expensive. The bail is $8,000 and it needs to be wired today." My grandmother asked, "Can't Charlotte call me herself? Can I talk to her again?" The lawyer said, "Unfortunately, she only gets limited phone access, and she's used her call for today. But I assure you, I'm working directly with her, and this is legitimate. I can provide you with my bar number and the case number if you'd like to verify." He rattled off a series of numbers that sounded official. My grandmother wrote them down, but she didn't know how to verify a Mexican attorney's credentials, and the lawyer was creating a sense of urgency that made her feel like she didn't have time to check. He said, "The fastest way to get the money here is through Western Union. I can walk you through the process. Do you have access to Western Union?" My grandmother said yes. There was a Western Union location at her local grocery store, a place she went regularly. The lawyer said, "Perfect. Here's what you'll need to do." He gave her detailed instructions. Go to Western Union, send $8,000 to a specific name in Mexico, and call him back with the confirmation number once it was done. My grandmother drove to the grocery store, went to the Western Union counter, and sent $8,000 to a name she didn't recognize in a city in Mexico she'd never heard of. The person at the Western Union counter asked if she was sure about the transaction. Sending money to Mexico to someone she didn't know was a common scam indicator. But my grandmother insisted it was for her granddaughter's bail and it was urgent. She called the lawyer back with the confirmation number. He thanked her profusely and said Charlotte would be released within hours. My grandmother felt relieved. She'd helped her granddaughter. Everything would be okay. But then, 2 days later, her phone rang again. It was the same young woman's voice, crying again. "Grandma, it's Charlotte. I'm still in jail. There's been a complication." My grandmother was confused and alarmed. "What do you mean? The lawyer said you'd be released." The voice said, "They found something else. When they searched my rental car after the accident, they found drugs, Grandma. I swear they're not mine. I think someone planted them. But now I'm facing drug charges on top of the accident. The bail is higher now. I need $15,000 more." My grandmother said, "Drugs? Charlotte, what's going on?" The voice was sobbing. "I don't know, Grandma. I'm so scared. But they're saying I could go to prison for years if I don't make bail. Please, Grandma, I need your help again. I'm so sorry. I know this is a lot of money, but I promise I'll pay you back. Please." The lawyer called again shortly after, confirming the story. He said the drug charges were serious, the bail had been increased, and they needed to act quickly. My grandmother was in shock, but her love for me overrode her skepticism. She sent another $15,000. This pattern continued. Every few days there would be another phone call, another complication, another request for money. The car accident victim was suing. That required a settlement payment, $12,000. The rental car company was demanding compensation for damage, $7,500. The prosecutor was threatening additional charges unless restitution was paid, $20,000. A judge required a payment for court costs, $9,000. Each time the calls came from the crying Charlotte, followed by calls from the lawyer, sometimes from people claiming to be police officers or court officials. The stories were always detailed, always urgent, and always required immediate payment. And each time they emphasized, "Don't tell anyone." Charlotte is embarrassed. She doesn't want her mother to know. This needs to stay confidential. My grandmother kept sending money. Western Union, MoneyGram, wire transfers, prepaid debit cards purchased at drugstores and grocery stores with the card numbers read over the phone. The amounts varied, sometimes $5,000, sometimes $25,000, sometimes $40,000. Over the course of 6 months, my grandmother sent $340,000. Her entire life savings. The scammers were sophisticated. They didn't just call once and ask for a huge sum. They built a narrative over months. They created an ongoing crisis that evolved and escalated. They called frequently, sometimes daily, to provide updates, maintain the emotional pressure, and keep my grandmother engaged in the situation. They also used psychological tactics. Fear. If you don't send money, Charlotte will go to prison for 15 years. Urgency. This needs to happen today or it's too late. Secrecy. Don't tell anyone. Charlotte doesn't want people to know. Authority. The callers used official-sounding titles, case numbers, and legal jargon. Consistency. Multiple people called, all telling the same story, making it seem more credible. Emotional manipulation. The crying Charlotte on the phone would beg and plead, triggering my grandmother's protective instincts. My grandmother is an intelligent woman. She taught school for 4 decades. She raised 3 successful children. She managed household finances for 50 years with my grandfather. But the scammers exploited the one vulnerability that even intelligent people have: love for family. When you think your grandchild is in jail, scared, and facing years in prison, rational thinking shuts down. The emotional panic takes over. You'll do anything to help them. And the scammers knew this. Meanwhile, the rest of our family had no idea any of this was happening. I talked to Grandma every Sunday, but during those calls, she never mentioned Mexico, jail, or any problems. She'd chat normally about her week, ask about my job, talk about her church activities. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. My mother visited Grandma about once a week, but the visits were brief. Drop off groceries, have coffee, chat for an hour. She didn't notice anything unusual. My uncle and aunt checked in periodically, but not regularly enough to notice changes, and Grandma was hiding it from all of us, as the scammers had instructed her to do. Looking back, there were signs we all missed. Grandma became more anxious and stressed. My mother noticed she seemed worried, but assumed it was just normal aging concerns. Grandma made comments about needing to take care of something important, but was vague about details. Grandma was going to the bank more frequently than usual, but since she was managing her own finances, no one questioned it. Grandma was making more trips to the grocery store and drugstore, ostensibly for errands, but actually to access Western Union and to buy prepaid debit cards. But these signs were subtle, and because Grandma was still functioning normally otherwise, none of us suspected she was being scammed out of her life savings. The scam might have continued until every penny was gone, if not for one person, Jennifer, a fraud prevention manager at my grandmother's bank. About 3 weeks ago, Jennifer noticed a pattern in Grandma's account. Over 6 months, there had been dozens of large withdrawals and wire transfers. The account balance had gone from $380,000 to $50,000. For someone who typically only withdrew money for living expenses, Jennifer called my grandmother and asked to speak with her about her account activity. Grandma was evasive, saying she was making some investments and helping with family matters. Jennifer pressed gently. She said, "Mrs. Thompson, I'm concerned because the pattern of activity in your account is consistent with scam victims we've seen. Has anyone contacted you asking for money for bail, legal fees, or emergency situations?" Grandma hesitated. Then she said, "My granddaughter has been in some trouble. I've been helping her with legal." Jennifer asked more questions. Where was the granddaughter? Mexico. What kind of legal trouble? An accident and drug charges. How was Grandma sending the money? Western Union, wire transfers, prepaid cards. Jennifer's heart sank. She'd seen this exact scam dozens of times. She said gently, "Thompson, I think you may have been scammed. This is a very common fraud targeting grandparents. The callers pretend to be a grandchild in trouble and manipulate victims into sending money. Have you actually seen your granddaughter? Have you spoken to anyone else in your family about this?" Grandma said, "Charlotte asked me not to tell anyone." She was embarrassed. Jennifer said, "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to call your granddaughter. Not the number that's been calling you, but her regular phone number that you've always used. Call her and verify that she's actually in Mexico." Grandma did. She called my cell phone. I answered on the second ring. Hi, Grandma. How are you? I was at work, sitting at my desk in Denver, 1,500 miles from Mexico. Grandma was silent for a long moment. Then she said, Charlotte, where are you right now? I said, I'm at my office. Why? Grandma said, You're not in Mexico? I said, Mexico? No, I haven't been to Mexico. I was there on vacation 2 years ago, but I'm definitely not there now. Why are you asking? Grandma started crying. Not just crying, sobbing. Deep, she said, Oh God, what have I done? I said, Grandma, what's wrong? What happened? Through her tears, she said, I sent them everything. I sent them all my money. They said it was you. They said you were in jail. They said you needed help. My stomach dropped. I said, Grandma, who said I was in jail? Who did you send money to? She could barely speak. She said, Charlotte, please, I need you right now. I told my boss there was a family emergency, got in my car and drove the 2 hours to Grandma's house. The whole drive, I was on the phone with her trying to understand what had happened. She explained everything. The phone calls, the lawyer, the crying voice pretending to be me, the months of demands for money, the $340,000 she'd sent. I felt sick. My grandmother, my brilliant, loving grandmother who'd helped raise me, had been manipulated and robbed by criminals who'd preyed on her love for me. When I arrived at her house, I found her sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, bank statements, Western Union receipts, pages of notes she'd taken during the phone calls, documenting every conversation, every demand, every instruction the scammers had given her. She'd kept meticulous records, thinking she was helping me navigate a legal crisis. Instead, she documented her own victimization. I sat with her and went through everything. The scope of the scam was staggering. It wasn't just the amount of money. It was the duration, the psychological manipulation, the multiple characters the scammers had played. Grandma kept saying, I'm so stupid. How could I fall for this? I should have known. I should have called your mother. I should have verified. I said, Grandma, you're not stupid. You were manipulated by professionals. This is what they do. They're experts at exploiting people's love for their family. But she was devastated, not just by the loss of her savings, but by the humiliation and self-blame. We immediately called the police and filed a report. A detective came to the house and took Grandma's statement. He looked through all her documentation and said, This is one of the most thorough scam operations I've seen. They hit all the classic elements: impersonation, urgency, secrecy, multiple calls over time. And they got $340,000. That's a huge score for them. He explained that these scams are often run by organized crime operations, frequently based overseas. The money gets moved quickly through multiple accounts and is often impossible to recover. The chances of catching the perpetrators are extremely low. He said, Thompson, the reality is, you're probably not going to get this money back. Grandma cried. She said, That was my husband's and my life saved. We worked 40 years to save that money, and I gave it away to criminals who lied to me. We also contacted the FBI, as international wire fraud falls under their jurisdiction. They took a report and said they'd investigate, but they warned us that recovery was unlikely. We contacted Western Union and MoneyGram and reported the fraud. They said they'd flagged the accounts that received the money, but most of the transactions were weeks or months old, and the money was long gone. We contacted Grandma's bank about the wire transfers. Jennifer, the fraud manager who'd initially identified the problem, was incredibly helpful. She said the bank would investigate, but since Grandma had authorized the transfers herself, even though she'd been deceived, the bank had limited liability. The harsh reality is, when you voluntarily send money, even if you've been scammed, it's very difficult to get it back. Over the following week, I stayed with Grandma. We called my mother, my uncle, and my aunt and told them what had happened. Everyone was shocked, heartbroken, and angry. My mother said, How did this happen for 6 months without any of us knowing? I said, Because they told her to keep it secret. And she did. She was trying to protect me, or who she thought was me. We also went through Grandma's phone records. She'd received hundreds of calls over 6 months from various numbers, some local, some with out-of-state area codes, some with international prefixes. The scammers had used multiple phone numbers to make it seem like multiple different people were calling. Some of the numbers were spoofed, made to look like local numbers when they were actually calling from overseas. We tried calling back some of the numbers. Most were disconnected. A few rang, but no one answered. One number was answered by a confused person who said they'd never called my grandmother and their number must have been spoofed. The scammers or ghosts. Untraceable and long gone with the money. My family held a meeting to discuss how to help Grandma financially. She'd lost her entire savings. She still had her house and her pension, but she no longer had the financial cushion she'd relied on for emergencies or her final years. We all agreed to contribute to helping rebuild some of her savings, though none of us had the resources to replace $340,000. But Grandma was adamant she didn't want charity. She said, "I made this mistake. I'll live with the consequences. I don't want you all to suffer because I was foolish." I said, "Grandma, you weren't foolish. You were manipulated by criminals." But she couldn't shake the self-blame. The psychological impact on my grandmother has been worse than the financial impact. She's developed anxiety and paranoia. She's terrified to answer her phone. She questions everyone's motives. She's withdrawn from her social activities because she's embarrassed about what happened. She told me, "Everyone at church will think I'm a gullible old fool. They'll wonder why I fell for such an obvious scam." I said, "Grandma, this happens to thousands of people every year. You're not alone." But shame is a powerful emotion, especially for elderly people who pride themselves on their independence and competence. We got Grandma connected with a support group for scam victims. Hearing from other people who'd been through similar experiences helped her feel less alone and less foolish. We also got her set up with a therapist who specializes in trauma and elder abuse. Because that's what this was, financial elder abuse, perpetrated by strangers over the phone. I also reported the scam to several organizations that track fraud: the FTC's fraud reporting system, the AARP Fraud Watch Network, the National Elder Fraud Hotline, IC3, Internet Crime Complaint Center. I wanted the scam documented so that patterns could be identified and hopefully prevented in the future. Through the AARP network, I learned just how common these grandparent scams are. Thousands of elderly people fall victim every year. The average loss is $9,000. But many victims, like my grandmother, lose much more. They're more likely to answer phone calls from unknown numbers. They may have savings that younger people don't. They often live alone and can be isolated. They're less familiar with modern scam tactics. They have strong protective instincts for their grandchildren. They're less likely to verify information before acting. They may have mild cognitive decline that affects judgment. Several of these risk factors. She lived alone. She always answered her phone. She had significant savings. And her love for me overrode her normally careful judgment. The scammers likely identified her as a target through data breaches, publicly available information, or purchased lists of elderly people with phone numbers. They knew her name. They knew she had a granddaughter. They may have even known my name from social media or other sources, which would have made the impersonation more convincing. These operations are sophisticated. The scammers often work in teams. One person plays the distressed grandchild. One person plays the lawyer. One person plays a police officer or judge. They coordinate their stories and timing. They use script and have been trained in psychological manipulation. They're not just random criminals making opportunistic calls. They're organized operations that have perfected the art of exploitation. 3 days ago, Grandma received another call. The caller ID showed unknown. She didn't answer, but they left a voicemail. It was the lawyer voice. He said, "Mrs. Thompson, this is Attorney Martinez. Charlotte is facing new charges. We need to discuss your options for helping her. Please call me back urgently at this number." They were trying again. Even after stealing $340,000, they were coming back for more. I was at Grandma's house when she got the voicemail. I called the number back, something I'd told Grandma never to do, but I wanted to confront them. A man answered. "Attorney Martinez speaking," I said. "This is Charlotte Thompson. The person you've been pretending is in jail." There was a pause. Then he hung up. I called back. The number was disconnected. They knew they'd been caught, so they burned that number and moved on to their next victim. I reported the new contact to the police, but there's little they can do. The scammers will just use different numbers and target someone else. The detective told me something chilling. He said, once someone is on these scammers' lists as a successful target, they'll sometimes sell that information to other scam operations. Your grandmother might start getting calls about other scams. Fake IRS debts, lottery winnings, computer virus scams. They know she sent money before, so she's considered a qualified target. We had to change Grandma's phone number. We set up call screening. We put her on the Do Not Call registry. We educated her extensively on red flags and verification steps, but the damage was done, financially and psychologically. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently. I could have been more present in Grandma's life, visiting more often, calling more frequently. I could have had conversations with her about scams and how to recognize them. I could have set up protections on her bank accounts, alerts for large withdrawals, requirements for family verification before big transfers. I could have noticed the signs of stress she was exhibiting, but I didn't. None of us did. And the scammers got $340,000. My grandmother is 78 years old. She worked hard her entire life. She and my grandfather saved every penny they could. They sacrificed vacations and luxuries to build that nest egg, and criminals stole it in 6 months by exploiting her love for me. They used my name, my voice, or an approximation of it, and my supposed suffering to manipulate her into giving them everything. I feel guilty, even though I know intellectually it's not my fault. But they used me as the weapon. My grandmother sent that money because she thought she was saving me. The investigation is ongoing, but I'm not hopeful. The detective was honest. These international scam operations are almost impossible to crack. The money goes through so many accounts in so many countries that tracing and recovering it is nearly impossible. The district attorney is reviewing the case, but prosecution is unlikely without identifying the perpetrators, and they're overseas using fake identities and spoofed phone numbers. We may never get justice. We will almost certainly never get the money back. My grandmother has to figure out how to live the rest of her life without the financial security she'd built over 50 years. She's talking about selling her house to rebuild her savings. She's talking about cutting back on everything. No more donations to the church, no more gifts for grandchildren's birthdays, no more emergency fund if something goes wrong. She's 78 years old, and she's starting over financially because scammers destroyed her life savings. I'm Charlotte. I'm 30 years old. And for 6 months, scammers called my grandmother almost daily, pretending to be me in jail in Mexico, manipulating her into sending $340,000 of her life savings to bail me out and pay for fake legal fees. My grandmother, brilliant, educated, careful, loving, fell victim to one of the cruelest scams targeting elderly people today. And if it can happen to her, it can happen to anyone's grandparent. Please, talk to your elderly loved ones about scams. Teach them these critical rules. 1. Verify independently. If someone calls claiming to be a grandchild in trouble, hang up and call that grandchild's known number directly. Don't use the number the caller provides. 2. Never send money in response to unexpected calls. No legitimate situation requires you to immediately wire money or buy prepaid cards and read off the numbers. 3. Don't keep it secret. If someone asks you to keep a situation confidential and not tell other family members, that's a red flag. Real emergencies don't come with secrecy requirements. 4. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong or too urgent or too scary, pause and verify before acting. 5. Know the warning signs. Demands for immediate payment. Requests for unusual payment methods, wire transfer, prepaid cards, cryptocurrency, secrecy requirements, threats of arrest or legal consequences, emotional manipulation, caller ID that can be spoofed. 6. Set up account protections. Talk to your bank about fraud alerts, withdrawal limits, and verification requirements for large transactions. 7. Register for the Do Not Call list. While it won't stop scammers, it reduces the volume of unwanted calls. Use call screening. Many phones have features that block unknown numbers or require callers to identify themselves. 9. Report suspicious calls to the FTC, local police, and the National Elder Fraud Hotline at 833-FRAUD. 1. Don't be embarrassed to ask for help. Scammers count on victims being too ashamed to tell anyone. The shame belongs to the criminals, not the victims. My grandmother is slowly recovering psychologically, though financially she may never recover. She's bravely agreed to share her story with others to prevent them from being victimized. She's spoken at her church, at the senior center, and even to a local news station about what happened to her. She said, if my story can save even one person from going through this, then maybe some good can come from it. She's the strongest person I know. But she shouldn't have had to be strong. She should have been protected from these predators. These scammers are still out there right now calling someone's grandmother, someone's grandfather, spinning the same lies, creating the same fear, extracting the same money. Protect your elderly loved ones. Have the awkward conversations about scams. Set up safeguards. Stay involved in their lives enough that you'd notice if something was wrong. Because I didn't notice for 6 months. And by the time I found out, $340,000 was gone. Don't let this happen to your family.